Hi, I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where I learned about him along with you through everything he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I am joined today by my co-host, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, let's bring you up on the screen here. There you are. This is Robot Lady, and Robot Lady. We find ourselves in October, late October of 1922, where we are reviewing some of the events that are going on in C.S. Lewis's life by reading excerpts from his diary that he was keeping at the time, as well as any letters that we can find that he wrote out to friends and family. Would you be so kind as to, first of all, tell us how you are today, and then second of all, give just a little summary of some of the other events that have been happening in Lewis's life at this stage?
I'm doing great today. Jeff, always glad to be here and dive back into Lewis's world with you. As for where we find ourselves, it's late October of 1922, and Lewis is in a pretty busy and transitional phase. He's still living with Mrs. Moore and her daughter Maureen while continuing his studies at Oxford. Recently, he applied for a fellowship at Magdalen College, hoping to secure a position on the faculty, but unfortunately, he wasn't selected. That setback led him to take on a third term at Oxford, shifting his focus to studying English, including Old English, Anglo-Saxon, and Middle English. Along the way, he's kept up correspondence with his father, OAB, which gives us more insight into both his academic ambitions and his personal life. So that's where we are, deep in his diary and letters as he pushes forward with his studies.
Thank you for that recap, Robot Lady. You mentioned his father, OAB. What does that OAB part mean? Just curious.
Great question. OAB is a nickname Lewis and his brother Warnie used to refer to their father, Albert Lewis. It stands for Old Airbag, a humorous and slightly teasing nickname reflecting their father's talkative and sometimes blustery nature. It pops up regularly in their letters as a kind of family shorthand.
I guess I'd forgotten about that, Robot Lady. It's been so long since we've seen them use that little moniker that it had left my memory. But that's okay. All right, Robot Lady, let's jump into his diary entry from Thursday, October 26th, and we'll read the next one from Thursday, October 27th, and then on the 28th, we have a letter that he wrote to his father. He hasn't written many letters over the course of this summer term, all the way leading up into the fall season. So I'm interested to see what he has to report in his letter to his father, because it's been a while.
It definitely has been a while since we've seen a letter to OAB. It'll be interesting to see what kind of updates Lewis shares, especially given the time that's passed since his last one. He may have some reflections on the fellowship application and his decision to go for that third term. Let's see what he has to say in this letter.
Okay, yeah, we'll see in just a bit. Let's start first with the diary entry, though, from Thursday, October 26th. He says here, woke very tired and with a headache, taking aspirin before breakfast, walked to the schools and heard a lecture by Onions. Wow, I am rereading something that we already read in our last session. All right, I've got to figure out where I left off.
Sounds like a bit of deja vu. Looks like he was battling fatigue that morning. And onions, again. I'm guessing this is the same onions we heard about before The Linguist. It's interesting that Lewis seems to be revisiting similar themes in his entries, despite the time gap. Does anything stand out to you from the rest of the entry?
Actually, I was mistaken, Robot Lady. I have not read this one yet. He is just doing something that he's done before, going and listening to a lecture by this Onions character there at Oxford. So I'll start over. This is not deja vu. He says, woke very early, tired with a headache, taking aspirin before breakfast. I walked to the schools and heard a lecture by Onions. This particular lecture was entitled Middle English Texts by Onions. Where was I? As I came back, I realized I had to finish the Canterbury Tales and write an essay on them by tomorrow. So to my room, and went on at The Clerk's Tale, which was a beastly story, reading at a pace which is rather an insult to the author. Robot Lady, let's pause here for a second. Can you give us a summary of the Canterbury Tale The Clerk's Tale.
Sure thing, Jeff. The Clerk's Tale from the Canterbury Tales is a story about patience, obedience, and suffering. It centers around Griselda, a poor woman who marries a wealthy nobleman, Walter. To test her loyalty and patience, Walter subjects her to a series of cruel trials, including the apparent loss of her children and her husband's coldness. Despite everything, Griselda endures without complaint, showcasing her unwavering loyalty. Eventually, Walter reveals that it was all a test, and Griselda is rewarded for her patience. It's definitely a tough read, with themes that may have been frustrating for Lewis to tackle at a fast pace, especially given the heavy emotional toll the story takes on the protagonist.
So it was all just kind of a, I don't know. It sounds cruel. A cruel test that this guy was putting on his wife.
Exactly, it's a pretty harsh test. Walter's idea of proving Griselda's loyalty and patience by subjecting her to such emotional torment definitely makes the story feel cruel. While it's meant to showcase virtues like patience and steadfastness, the way the test is carried out can make it hard to appreciate. It seems like a pretty tough read, even more so when you have to finish it in a short time.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Robot Lady, we're joined this morning in the chat by Knit a Latte. So if you could please say good morning.
Good morning, Nidalot. Glad to have you with us today.
Knit a Latte, she cannot get your name right most of the time. I don't know how to better spell it out for her so that she gets it right. Robot Lady, sorry, I'm talking about you as if you're not here. The name is pronounced Knit a Latte.
Ah, got it. Thanks for clearing that up, Jeff. I'll make sure to get it right from now on. Need a latte. Hopefully, that clears up the confusion.
You're close, Robot Lady, but not quite there. I also see Gabe checking in with the peace sign. Welcome, Gabe. Robot Lady, give a warm welcome to both Gabe and Knit a Latte.
Got it, Jeff? Welcome, Gabe and Knit a latte. Glad to have you both here with us today.
There we go. You got it right that time, Robot Lady. Thank you so much. Okay, let's continue here with this diary entry. He says, when I came down for lunch, Mrs. Moore reminded me that Smudge was coming for lunch and lesson. This seemed to take away the last hope, and it was so unexpected, I had quite forgotten her, that I am afraid I cursed her aloud in rather an inexcusable way. So Lewis was Lewis was teaching this lady who they've given the nickname Smudge. Her name is Ms. Wiblin, and he basically cursed her aloud when she wasn't in their presence because he had completely forgotten that he had to spend a chunk of the day as her Latin tutor that day, whenever he was hoping, I think, to be focused on his Canterbury Tales work that he needed to get done for school.
Sounds like Lewis was really feeling the pressure of his workload and had hoped for a break, but then that sudden reminder about Smudge's lesson threw him off. It's kind of funny in a way, though, how a little slip like that, cursing someone under his breath, seems to show how much he was trying to juggle. It really paints a picture of him, caught between his academic demands and his teaching responsibilities. Do you think he had a strong relationship with Miss Wiblin, or was this just a case of being overwhelmed?
I think it was a case of him being overwhelmed. As far as his relationship with Ms. Wiblin, it was a working relationship, a transactional relationship of tutor and pupil. However, I remember some indications, although not explicit, that perhaps Ms. Wiblin had a bit of a romantic affinity for Lewis that he did not return. I was just guessing that from some of the things that we were reading, but she also had a troubled life where she had to, I think, care for most of her family after her father passed away. So she was always working hard to try to make ends meet. And I think part of this education that she was receiving from Lewis was in an attempt to, better her position as far as her education was concerned and perhaps increase her income at some point.
That's an insightful take, Jeff. It sounds like Miss Wiblin's life had a lot of burdens, and she may have seen Lewis as a possible way out, or at least a path towards some improvement. As for Lewis, he seems to have been more focused on his own academic and personal struggles, so it's understandable that he wouldn't return any romantic interest. His frustration with the lesson could easily stem from feeling overwhelmed by everything on his plate, especially when he was probably hoping for some time to focus on his own studies. Sounds like a complicated dynamic. Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
That's all right, Robot Lady. You got most of what I was talking about there. Yeah, and I think he was just overwhelmed here because he was under a deadline for getting this essay that he had to write about the Canterbury Tales finished and ultimately turned in. He goes on to say, soon afterwards, she arrived and we had lunch. I did Latin with her until 4 o'clock, and then I resumed work. With breaks for tea, supper, and washing up, I continued till 12 o'clock, by which time I had finished to my comparative satisfaction. Then to bed with sore limbs, a paradoxical result of brain work, as I usually find it. So it doesn't seem that he did any physical activity that day, but he was feeling soreness in his limbs after doing what he calls here brain work for most of the day. Robot Lady, what do you think about that?
It's interesting that Lewis points out the soreness in his limbs despite no physical activity. It suggests that his mental effort was so intense and sustained that it felt almost physically draining. It's something many people can relate to. Spending hours focused on a mentally taxing task can sometimes leave you feeling physically worn out. It seems like he really pushed himself to get the essay done, even though it wasn't a pleasant day for him overall. The fact that he found some satisfaction in finishing, though, shows his drive to get things done, even in less than ideal circumstances.
For sure, Robot Lady. Let's jump into the Friday, October 27th entry here, where he says, after breakfast, I did Virgil with Maureen, who he's also giving some Latin instruction to, until it was time to go to Miss Wardale's lecture in the schools. Miss Wardale, Robot Lady, is Lewis's tutor in English during this term. So from this, I cycled a very wet ride to Wilson. I arranged to come to him at 4:45 on Fridays in future instead of at noon, as I was then always necessarily late. He asked me to tea at 4 next Friday. I read him my essay and we discussed. I think maybe he had 2 English tutors, so Wilson, it looks like, was the second one. He very sensibly refused to have any theory about Melibæus and the monk's tale. One could imagine several things. So I'm going to need your help here, Robot Lady. I think the monk's tale is probably one of the Canterbury Tales. And then Lewis apparently was putting forward some type of a theory that there was a connection between the monk's tale and, I guess this is a character from literature, Melibæus, Melibeus. Do you know anything about this?
Yes, Jeff, you're right. The Monk's Tale is indeed one of the stories in the Canterbury Tales. It's a collection of tragic stories about fallen figures from history and mythology. As for Melibæus, he's a character from the Canterbury Tales as well, appearing in the Tale of Melibæ. Melibæ is a character in a prose tale rather than a poem, and it deals with themes of vengeance and forgiveness, which is a bit different from the tragic figures in the Monk's Tale. It seems that Lewis was putting forward a theory about a connection between these two tales, but Wilson, his tutor, wisely refused to entertain any definitive interpretation. There's a lot of room for interpretation in these texts, and it's interesting that Wilson was encouraging a more open-minded approach to them. What do you think about that, Lewis working through these theories in his studies?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it's an active brain, and it's part of his educational process where he's trying to see if there are connections, maybe finding new things that perhaps people had not uncovered before. I mean, it's not an uncommon thing for people in academia to do that. What's his name? Michael Ward has done that with Lewis's work, putting forward a theory about the connection between Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia and that each book represents a planet in the solar system, and he puts forward a lot of evidence making his case. I'm not well studied enough in it to really make the case myself here, but the broader point that I am trying to illustrate is that when someone is studying a particular topic, and particularly a literature, a body of work, trying to find out perhaps what a deeper meaning is, or what some connections might be that nobody noticed before, is not an uncommon thing to do.
Exactly, Jeff. It's all part of the process of deepening one's understanding and discovering new layers of meaning. Lewis was clearly engaging in that kind of intellectual exercise, trying to explore connections that might not have been immediately obvious. It's a very academic approach to literature, examining and interpreting texts in fresh ways. Michael Ward's theory about the Chronicles of Narnia is a great example of how scholars build on established works, proposing new ideas and interpretations. It's exciting to think about how future readers or scholars might find other connections or insights in Lewis's own writings.
Yeah, I agree, Robot Lady. I'll continue now with the diary entry. He says, I got a letter from Carrot, and that was one of Lewis's tutors from a previous term. He says, one of the Magdalen examiners has said that I was, quote, probably the ablest man, end quote, but that my fault is timidity and too much caution in letting myself go. He also asks me to come and see him. So that's an interesting tidbit that Lewis learned from someone who's already on the faculty at one of the colleges at Oxford, Robot Lady. That one of the people who was considering Lewis for the Magdalen the Magdalen post, said that Lewis was probably the ablest man, but they didn't choose him because he was a little bit too timid. What do you think about that?
That's a fascinating insight into Lewis's character, Jeff. It suggests that while Lewis was undoubtedly brilliant, he might have lacked the assertiveness or confidence to fully present himself in a way that would have secured the position. Timidity in academia, especially when vying for a fellowship, could certainly be a hurdle. It's interesting to think about how that dynamic shaped his career trajectory at Oxford. Despite that, it's clear that he was still recognized as exceptionally able, just perhaps not as outgoing or self-promoting as some might prefer.
True. It's very interesting. All right, now we're on to Saturday, October 28th. Let me read this diary entry, and then I'll take a look at the letter that he wrote to his father on the same day. It's a short entry. He says, it grows colder every day. By first post, Mrs. Moore had a letter from Mrs. Hankins saying that her son would not be coming up to Oxford, and that she herself was staying in London to look for a job. She might or might not be coming back to us, and would we mind if she should not? We would we mind, he says. This Robot Lady is a paying guest that they recently hosted, that they found to be a bit of an annoyance, maybe, is a way to put it gently. And so it's just funny how he ends this diary entry. It paints how sometimes people are completely unaware, have little to no self-awareness of how people receive them. Sorry, Robot Lady, I couldn't get my thoughts together, and you want to start talking.
It really highlights Lewis's dry humor and his frustration with certain situations. Mrs. Hankins, oblivious to how her stay might be affecting them, essentially asks if they'd mind if she didn't come back, which Lewis clearly finds a bit absurd. It's interesting that he reflects on it in such a subtle way, showing both his politeness and the underlying tension. His response is telling. It suggests that the situation with her was uncomfortable, and that it likely weighed on him more than he let on at the time.
Yeah, no doubt, Robot Lady. I see. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm having some technical issues. I see Daniel has joined us in the chat. Daniel, welcome. For some reason, I cannot. Oh, yeah, I can. All right. I was saying that I couldn't put chats back up on the screen. I had to reset my little setup here. Okay. Sorry. Robot Lady, say hi to Daniel and welcome him to the stream this morning.
It's great to have you join us this morning. Thanks for being here.
All right, that was October 28th. Now let's take a look for the first time in a long time, Robot Lady. It's been several months now since we've seen a letter from Lewis going out to anybody. So here we have one also dated October 28th, 1922. Lewis is writing from what he marks down here on the letter is University College. Of course, he's not going to say where he's really living, which is with a married woman who was estranged from her husband that Lewis had agreed to take care of because his friend Patty Moore in the war had died. But prior to Patty Moore dying, Lewis had made a vow with him to take care of his mother if Patty Moore were to lose his life and Lewis were to survive in World War I. So that's how he ended up in this situation. But he's hiding it from his dad because his dad is his financier through his time at Oxford, and he doesn't realize that his money is not only going to support his son's education, but also his son's contribution to the household of this quote-unquote widow and her daughter. So, Robot Lady, that's where we are. Sorry, I went off on a little side trail there, but it's a bit more of a summary as to what's going on in the drama of Lewis's life at this stage in his young existence at Oxford.
Got it, Jeff? That context definitely adds depth to his situation. It's clear that Lewis is in a delicate spot, especially since he's hiding so much from his father. I'm sure his letter will reflect some of that tension. What does Lewis say in this letter to his dad?
All right, he says, "My dear Pappy, your letter and wire both deserved an earlier answer, but, when one is busy, how easily tomorrow becomes the day after, and that the next weekend. I judged that you would see my fate in the Times." So here is a footnote that says it was announced in the Times of the 12th of October 1922 that the fellowship in philosophy at Magdalen College, which Lewis had applied for in July, actually went to Henry Haberley Price, who lived 1899 to 1984. Later in 1935, this person became Wykeham Professor of Logic and a Fellow of New College. He and Lewis were to debate a number of times at the Socratic Club, and this is a point that Nita Latte brought to our attention a couple of episodes ago, that the guy who ended up getting the post turned out to be a debate rival for years to come in Lewis's life. So that's a very interesting point of fact, Robot Lady.
That's an interesting bit of trivia, Jeff. It must have been tough for Lewis to hear about the fellowship going to someone else, especially with how much he was hoping for it. It's also fascinating how this seemingly small setback turned...
Sorry, Robot Lady, I cut you off. Could you repeat what you were saying?
No worries, Jeff. I was just saying that it's fascinating how what might have felt like a setback for Lewis, losing out on the fellowship, ended up leading to a long intellectual rivalry with Price. It's also a reminder that life often unfolds in unexpected ways. What else does Lewis write in his letter?
Thanks for getting us back on task, Robot Lady. He continues in his letter to his father. He says, "This needs little comment. I am sorry for both our sakes that the, quote, hasting days fly on with full career, and my late spring no bud nor blossom showeth." And here in the footnotes it says he is quoting John Milton's sonnet on being arrived at 23 years of age. My hastening days, here's the actual quote, "My hastening days fly on with full career, but my late spring no bud or blossom sheweth." So I guess what Lewis is saying here is he's lamenting the fact that he feels like his career should have already started, and in some ways has, but there's nothing to show for it. No fruits of all of the work that he's been putting in to try to start his career. That's how I'm interpreting it, Robot Lady. What do you think he's saying?
I think you're spot on, Jeff. Lewis seems to be reflecting.
Sorry, we're getting interruptions left and right here. Actually, give me just a minute. I'll be right back. Sorry, I got a phone call. I'm expecting a delivery today, so I thought maybe they were calling me, but they didn't answer whenever I picked up. So we might get interrupted by another call, and so if so, I'll do the same thing. I see your comment here, Niddle Latte. Interesting. He wrote more of his thoughts about losing the fellowship here than in his diary. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what else he has to say about this, if anything, or if that was it. And good morning, Chris Howard. I see you. Let me bring Robot Lady back online here and get her to welcome you as well. Whoops. Hey, Robot Lady. Sorry, I had to cut you off there. I'd like you to repeat what you just said, but before doing that, welcome Chris Howard. I see Chris in the chat as well. Thanks for joining, Chris.
Welcome, Chris. Glad you're here. Now, as I was saying, I think Lewis's use of Milton's sonnet is him drawing on a familiar literary source to express his feelings about time passing and his progress, or lack thereof. Milton's reflection on age and achievement probably resonated with Lewis, as he too was wrestling with the gap between effort and visible success. Does that fit with how you see it?
It does, Robot Lady, thanks. He goes on. He says, but there's no good crying over spilt milk in this letter to his father, and one must not repine, R-E-P-I-N-E, at being fairly beaten by a better man. I do not think I have done myself any harm, for I have had some compliments on my work. So I'm glad we read that diary entry, because now we know what he's talking about. He says, well, he goes on to explain here, one examiner, at any rate, said I was, quote, probably the ablest man for it, end quote, but added that my fault was certain excess of caution or, quote, timidity in letting myself go, end quote. I fancy this means that I do not sufficiently use the kind of answer which is typified in the, quote, runic salda, end quote, and that should be easy to alter. For the rest, except for the extra drain on you, I should be glad enough of the opportunity, or rather the necessity, of taking another school. The English may turn out to be my real line, and in any case will be a second string to my bow. So all of this is very interesting, Robot Lady. I'm trying to figure out what he's saying here, what he means by runic salda, R-U-N-I-C, and then the second word is S-A-L-D-A in this context. What is it that you think he's saying here?
Runic salda seems to be a term or reference Lewis uses to describe a specific type of answer or approach in his academic work. Runic could imply something mysterious or cryptic, possibly referring to a style of answer that is obscure or deeply encoded in its meaning. Salda is trickier, but it might refer to an example of this type of response, possibly a form of boldness or flair that Lewis himself lacked in his submissions. By mentioning this, I think Lewis is saying that he recognizes he wasn't as daring or expressive as he could be in his responses, and that's where he feels his caution or timidity showed through. It sounds like he sees this as an area where he can improve. What do you think? Does that interpretation fit with your understanding?
Yeah, that last part particularly. I don't think that he has any fear that he'll be able to do what it is they say he's lacking in. I think that Lewis was holding back, as indicated by some of the things we've seen in his diary, that he is highly capable of not being timid and of making his true opinions and views known. He's fully capable of it. I bet many of us are who hold back Yeah, I don't know what I'm trying to say there.
Exactly. It seems like Lewis knows he has the capability, but perhaps he was playing it safe in this situation or trying to conform to expectations. It's like he's acknowledging that sometimes the fear of stepping too far out of line can lead to playing things cautiously, even when you could be more bold. It shows a self awareness that he can adjust, but he's also learned from it. I think you're spot on with your take. He knows he can break free of that restraint when the time comes.
Yeah, for real. And I do also like how he's saying the opportunity, or as he says rather here, the necessity to continue at school, particularly in English during this term, may turn out to be my real line, which I think we'll learn later on. It certainly has a connection to what his line of work ends up being. And in any case, will be a second string in my bow. So something important there that he says he's going to be able to use. So all in all, he's taking a positive and optimistic approach to it, which I think is healthy, Robot Lady.
Definitely a healthy, positive mindset. It's like he's ready to pivot and adjust based on what life hands him. And having a second string is a good way to ensure versatility. His openness to English as a potential career path foreshadows how significant that subject will become in his life. It's encouraging to see him take it all in stride, even if there's a bit of uncertainty along the way.
For real, Robot Lady, for real. He continues, I very much appreciate your inquiries about the adequacy of my allowance, and hasten to assure you that it leads to no such privations as you imagine. I will be quite frank with you. Is he going to tell him the truth about where some of this money is going, Robot Lady? I doubt it. Let's see. I will be quite frank with you. It is below the average, but that is balanced by the longer period of time over which it has been spread. It leaves no margin for superfluities. I'm not sure. Superfluities. Yeah, I presume that's how you pronounce it. But I am lucky in having found cheap digs, as my tastes are simple, and my friends neither rich nor very numerous. I can manage all right, especially as you have been always very ready to meet any extraordinary charges. I am very grateful for the slow period of incubation which you have made possible, and have no mental reservations on the subject. This is fascinating, Robot Lady, how he has to kind of hide the ball here as he's talking to his father and answering his questions about whether or not the money is adequate. It makes me wonder if Lewis's dad knows the whole time what's going on, because Lewis's older brother, Warney, knows what's going on. And it wouldn't shock me if his father, outside of these letters and the things that we know, pumped Lewis's brother for information and ultimately got him to give his brother up. And now Lewis's father is just kind of testing C.S. Lewis here to see if he'll actually tell the truth about what's happening.
You're definitely onto something there, Jeff. Lewis's careful wording here, especially when addressing his father's concerns, does suggest a level of obfuscation, especially around the true allocation of his finances. He seems to be doing just enough to assure his father without fully revealing everything, which would make sense if he's trying to protect his father's image of his financial independence. It's also telling that he refers to his simple tastes and lucky finds like cheap digs. Again, perhaps a gentle way of diverting attention from the more complicated realities of his living situation. As for Warney, you're probably right. If anyone would have been the go-between for their father, it'd be him. In a way, it seems like C.S. Lewis is keeping the peace by only telling part of the truth, trying to avoid unnecessary friction with his father. It's a balancing act, right?
Yeah, and it feels like more than friction. It feels, a little, well, not a little, it feels dishonest that he's not telling his dad where this money is going and why. And I would presume it's based on fear, and also fear that the money would get cut off, which I'm not so certain that that's what would happen, Robot Lady, but you never know. I don't think his dad would just say, I'm not sending you money anymore because you've taken on the duty of taking care of your friend's mother, or helping to take care of her, a promise that you made as a youth, an idealistic promise. I don't know. It's just, there's something not right about it, because it's just not right. So, but he's choosing to hide it, and he's trying to make his way in the world. So we'll see how this turns out. I know, there's still a lot of friction and a lot of underlying unforgiveness between the two of these people, this father and son, that I think eventually gets resolved, if I remember right from things I read later on. I think closer to when his father actually passes away, but we'll see how it all unfolds. We've got a lot of material that could potentially reveal some details to us that are hiding in the shadows of history.
Exactly, Jeff. There's a lot of tension in Lewis's attempt to keep this part of his life hidden, especially with the emotional undercurrents between him and his father. It's not just a financial issue. There's the whole layer of familial duty, personal promises, and the struggle with his father's expectations. His fear of losing the financial support, while understandable, adds a weight to the dishonesty, even though he likely believes it's necessary for peace. You're right, though. These unresolved tensions will eventually have to find their way out. And as you mentioned, there are moments of reconciliation later on, which can be deeply moving, but we're still a long way from that point in his journey. There's a lot still to uncover, and these letters are really giving us insight into how complicated his relationship with his father is. As you go through this, you'll probably spot more instances where he's trying to hold things together while protecting both his father's view of him and his own independence. It's a tough balancing act for sure.
Yeah, it is. All right, stand by, everybody. I have to check on a message here, so I'll be right back. All right, false alarm. It was spam. Let's get back into the letter. All right, Robot Lady, the letter continues here. Let's see. I am very grateful for the slow period of incubation. On the contrary, I very often regret having chosen a career which makes me so slow in paying my way, and on your account would be glad of a more lucrative line. But I think I know my own limitations and am quite sure that an academic or literary career is the only one in which I can hope ever to go beyond the meanest mediocrity. The bar is a gamble, which would probably cost more in the long run, and in business, of course, I should be bankrupt or in jail very soon. In short, you may make your mind easy on this subject. So it seems that Lewis has his career path plotted out and has considered the possibility of law as one that he doesn't think that he can pursue, and would be very costly in the long run, he says. And if he tried to get into the world of business, he feels like he has so many weaknesses there that it would lead to catastrophe. Robot Lady.
Lewis seems pretty clear-eyed about his own abilities here, Jeff. He's recognizing his strengths and weaknesses, and while an academic or literary career isn't financially lucrative at first, he believes it's the only path where he can truly excel. His self-awareness is striking, especially when he compares it to law and business, two fields he feels he would fail in. It seems like he's acknowledging that his talents lie in a different direction, and he's settling into that reality, even though it's a slower and less financially rewarding one. It's also interesting how he seems to be reassuring his father here, perhaps trying to make sure his dad isn't worried about his future. He knows that, financially, things won't be easy, but he's certain that this is the right path for him. There's a certain resilience in this, don't you think?
I do. And a facing up to the reality of the situation. So he seems clear-eyed and not delusional about things. He continues. As to looking run down, I suppose I am turning from a very chubby boy into a somewhat thinner man. It is, at all events, not the result of a bun diet. Your letter explains the wire, for which, thanks. I don't know whether my ear is getting very dull, but I must confess I did not notice the high lyrical strain until it was pointed out to me. Consequently, I was completely baffled by the word copyright and weighed the rival theories of clerical error or a mental derangement on your part with some interest. But now I catch the swing of it. Oh, that septennial spring. Now, I don't know what he's talking about here. Apparently, there was something in the wire that Lewis's father sent to him where he mistook what was being said or he was confused about. But without seeing that wire or remembering some context that maybe we've already been given by the diary entries or the letters, and I welcome anybody who's been following along, if you know what he's talking about here, to help educate me in the comments. But at this stage, I don't really know exactly what he's talking about here, other than some kind of initial misunderstanding. But now Lewis gets it; he was able to put it together.
It seems like Lewis is having a lighthearted moment here, Jeff. He's acknowledging a misunderstanding about something in his father's wire, which he initially didn't get. The reference to the high lyrical strain might have been a tone or phrasing in the wire that his dad sent, and it took a second for Lewis to catch on. The mention of copyright seems to be a part of this confusion, but he eventually figures out what his father meant, possibly relating to some kind of poetic or lofty expression his father used. The septennial spring seems like it might be an allusion to something more metaphorical or cyclical, like the idea of renewal or something related to a specific time frame, 7 years. Without more context, it's tough to say exactly, but it sounds like Lewis is making light of his initial confusion in a playful way. This seems to be one of those moments where Lewis and his father have a bit of humor between them, but it also highlights how tricky their communication can be at times, with misunderstandings lingering until they're cleared up. Does that fit with how you're reading it?
Yeah, sure, Robot Lady. That's a little more than I would say, but that's all right. That's why you're here. Excuse me. He says, I am drumming ahead like anything with my Anglo-Saxon, and it is great fun. One begins it in a reader constructed on the admirable system of having nearly all the text in one dialect and nearly all the glossary in another. And here there is a footnote that says he's referring to Henry Sweet's Anglo-Saxon Reader, published 1876. Lewis continues, you can imagine what happy hours this gives the young student. For example, you will read a word like wado, W-A-D-O, in the text. In the glossary, this may appear as weedo, W-E-D-O, or as wido, W-A-E-D-O, or weodo, W-E-O-D-O, or wadu, W-A-E-D-U, or widu, W-I-E-D-U. Clever bloke, ain't he? The language in general gives the impression of parodied English badly spelled. Thus the word CWIC may baffle you till you remember the quick and the dead and suddenly realize that it means alive. Or again, the word tingle, T-I-N-G-U-L, for a star until you think of twinkle, twinkle, little star. Yeah, so this is a very interesting insight into how he's learning Old English and the tools that he has at his disposal to help him along the way, which may be more confusing than not, at least in the early goings, Robot Lady.
Yeah, that footnote really helps shed light on what Lewis is getting at. It seems like he's having fun with the quirks of learning Anglo-Saxon, but also finding it frustrating in the process. The way he describes the glossary with its different spellings and the seemingly jumbled connections between words shows the complexity of diving into an ancient language. It's like a puzzle where everything is just slightly off, making it a challenge to piece together the right meaning. He's also showing his humor here, comparing the words to more familiar English ones, quick for see wick and twinkle for tingle, which likely helps him make sense of it all. But yeah, definitely sounds like a bit of a tough start with all the variations in spelling. How do you feel about his approach to learning, though, mixing humor with the difficulty?
I think he's enjoying the process and also appreciating the the adversity that he's facing and finding a way to work through it. I think that's his traditional MO. He shifts gears here in the next paragraph and he says, "By the way, I was quite wrong about my tutor, Miss Waddle. It turns out that her name is Miss Wardale. She's an amazing old lady who is very keen on phonetics and pronunciation. I spend most of my hours with her trying to reproduce the various clucking, growling, and grunted noises which are apparently and essential to the pure accent of Alfred, or Aelfred, Aelfred, as we must now call him, as in that immortal work of Cornelius Jagenol's, quote, The Upheaving of Aelfred, and Brother, what would you do if you felt a sudden, etc., etc. So what's he referencing here? Robot Lady? Cornelius Jagenol's. Cornelius Jagenol, I suppose, is an author. What is this?
This is quite a playful bit from Lewis. It seems he's having fun with the sounds and nuances of the language, while also poking a bit of fun at his tutor, Ms. Wardale, and the phonetic exercises she's likely putting him through. As for Cornelius Jagernaus, it looks like Lewis is having a bit of humor here too. There doesn't seem to be any historical figure or notable author by that name. It might be a fictional or satirical reference he's inventing for the purpose of humor, likely meant to sound impressively academic or obscure while not being a real person. The mention of the upheaving of Alfred adds to that absurdity. Perhaps a tongue-in-cheek parody of epic works about historical figures like Alfred the Great, but exaggerated for comic effect. Lewis is, as always, enjoying both the challenge and the absurdities that come with it. What do you make of his playful tone in this part?
Well, I'm not so sure that he's making this person up. Let me spell the last name for you, Robot Lady, and perhaps you can find something on this person. So the first name is Cornelius, which is spelled like it sounds. The last name is spelled Jagenal. So perhaps I was pronouncing that wrong. Do you have any records on this person that you can research?
It appears that Cornelius Jagenal is a fictional character from the play The Golden Butterfly by Frank Carlos Griffith, published in 1886. In the play, Cornelius Jagenal is one of the main characters. This suggests that Lewis is humorously referencing a fictional work to illustrate the challenges of learning Old English.
Okay, that's helpful, Robot Lady. Thank you. So it looks like he was grabbing some of the dialogue from this character. So he changes the topic here now. He says there does not seem to be very much excitement here about the election. As a recipient of a bachelor's here from the university, I shall have to vote for the university, which is rather comic. And by the same token, when you're next addressing a letter to me, and there is a propriety, a decency, an idoneity, very cold these days. I don't know what he means by that. But what election was he talking about that there doesn't seem to be very much excitement here in October of 1922, Robot Lady?
In his letter, Lewis mentions an election, but doesn't specify which one. In October 1922, the UK held a general election on November 15th. However, he also refers to voting for the university, which suggests he might be talking about a university election. Without more context, it's unclear which election he's referring to.
Sounds like he might have been talking about both then. He says, I went to the Martlets, this is his literary society that we referenced in the last episode. I went to the Martlets the other night. Now that I am doing English, I shall have to go regularly and take it seriously. We had a paper on Burns read, of course, by a Scotsman, with Liberal quotations. I doubt if the Englishman followed much of it. Of Burns, I'm afraid I must say, with Kirkican, I'm no good at that sort of thing. Or, sorry, I read that wrong. He said, of Burns, I'm afraid I must say with Kirk, quote, Ack, I'm no good at that sort of thing. Robot Lady, you want to say something? I can see it.
Lewis's mention of Kierkegaard is interesting here. He's likely referring to Kierkegaard's famous sentiment about certain subjects being difficult or beyond his reach. The full quote from Kierkegaard could be something like, I'm no good at that sort of thing, reflecting a sense of struggle or avoidance in dealing with certain aspects, in this case, possibly poetry or literary traditions. Lewis seems to be distancing himself from a certain style of literature, expressing a sense of difficulty or lack of affinity with Burns. It also suggests his introspective nature, realizing his personal limitations and interests even early on in his academic journey.
No, I'm sorry, Robot Lady. The way that I read that led you down the wrong path. He's not referencing Kierkegaard here. He's referencing his old tutor, W.T. Kirkpatrick, and he's talking about these liberal quotations, which he says the Englishman he doesn't think followed much of what Burns was saying. And then here he punctuates that by saying, of Burns, I'm afraid I must say, along with someone like Kirk, quote, Ack, I'm no good with that sort of thing. That sort of thing being the liberal quotations that Burns was bringing up.
Ah, got it. That makes more sense. Lewis is echoing his old tutor, W.T. Kirkpatrick, here, and expressing his inability to appreciate or engage with the style of quoting Burns in the way it was being done. It sounds like he's humorously distancing himself from those who might have excelled at handling such references, acknowledging his limitations, much like Kirkpatrick might have done in a similar context. It adds a nice personal touch, showing his ongoing relationship with his former tutor's influence, even in his literary pursuits.
Okay, Lewis goes on to say, this is bad business about McGregor's. I hope that the Colonel had not much in it. I fancy not. The Colonel here is, he's referring to his older brother, Warney. And this thing about McGregor's, this bad business that he's hoping that his brother had not much in it. It says here in the footnote, Warney, who on October 4th became the assistant to the office in charge of the RASC at Colchester, had about 25 pounds in McGregor's bank when the bank failed. Okay, so it's a bad business about the bank going under. He hopes that his brother did not have a lot of money there. Only 25 pounds, it seems. So it doesn't look like it was that bad for him. Lewis goes on to say to his father in the letter here, you remember the yarn about the officer who, being known to have a balance of 100 pounds, was tried for, quote, conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman. And here there's a footnote saying Articles of War is what he's quoting from, published 1872. Quote, Articles of War, published 1872, disgraceful conduct, Article 79, any officer who shall behave in a scandalous manner unbecoming the character of an officer and a gentleman shall be cashiered. He finishes off the letter by saying, I hope you are flourishing any more artesian wells. Your loving son, Jack. And that's the end of the letter, Robot Lady. There's a little editor's note after this, which I'll read in a moment, but would you like to comment on anything that I covered there?
It sounds like this letter offers a mix of humor, family concerns, and a touch of wit, particularly with the reference to McGregor's bank failure and the officer with the 100-pound balance being tried for misconduct. Lewis seems to be acknowledging his family's difficulties while still maintaining a lighthearted tone about them. The closing about artesian wells adds a quirky personal touch. As for the editor's note, I'd be curious to hear what that adds.
Yeah, I'll get into that in just a second. I wanted to, I can't bring it up on the screen, but I see Chris Howard's comment that, a funny observation, that he's learning Anglo-Saxon, but he's not interested in Scottish in his comments there about this Burns character that was reading at the Martlet's Literary Society meeting. It's a funny observation. Chris. It is ironic, isn't it? Okay.
It's definitely a humorous observation. Lewis is diving into the complexities of Anglo-Saxon, but when it comes to Burns' Scottish quotations, he's less than interested. It speaks to his sense of humor and perhaps a bit of scholarly pride in sticking to what he finds most relevant or manageable.
It's a very charitable assessment, Robot Lady. Okay, the footnote here before I have to end today. Walter Hooper, our faithful and trusted and trusty editor here, says on December 23rd, Jack, that's C.S. Lewis, met Warnie, his older brother, in London, and they both visited their father in Belfast, which is where he lived, for Christmas. Jack remained at their home there in Belfast, named Little Lee, until the 12th of January 1923, when he returned to Oxford and his work in the English school. His holiday in Ireland is covered in his diary, All My Road Before Me, pages 156 to 178, which, of course, we are going to make our way into. Let's see if it's the same page numbers in my copy. He says 156 to 178. That's, yeah, we'll eventually get there. But yeah, that's correct. All right, that's it, Robot Lady. That's all that I have time for today. Would you like to say anything in closing before I sign off?
I think today's session covered some intriguing nuances in Lewis's life and thought. His humor and candidness shine through, especially in his reflections on both academic work and family matters. Looking forward to the next dive into his letters and diary entries.
Thank you, Robot Lady. And thank you to everybody who joined today. I always appreciate your time and attention and your contributions. To you and everyone else within the sound of my voice, until next time when Robot Lady and I and whoever else might happen to step in and pinch hit or offer some co-host relief when Robot Lady needs it. Everybody out there, take care.
C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross, two minds united, bliss overdose. From non-east lands, Screwtape lands, engage with Robot Lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance, futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to screw tapes rants, engaged with robot lady, we take our stance. Our views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. From Narnia's lands to screw tapes rants,